Good morning. Oh man, I know it's November.
22nd.
22nd, it's Sunday, November 22nd. This is my Sunday school class, and we are in the book of Genesis, and this is actually being broadcast to the public and not just to me, like it was last week. It was really good too. You needed to be at my house though to hear it, apparently. So, but now this is going back out to the public. So sorry about that for those of you who were just delighted that you didn't have to suffer through it. It's back. Now we're in Genesis chapter 18. It's two parts in Genesis chapter 18. In the previous chapter, God had appeared to Abram, changed his name to Abraham because you're going to be father of many nations, not just that one nation that he had told him about at first. When he first came to him, I'm going to make you a great people. And in Abraham's mind, that was just one set of people. And God said, surprise, you're actually going to be father of many nations. Um, and that was all fine with God as part of his plan. He had said, in fact, your people will go all the way from Egypt up to Syria. And however, specifically the people that will come through your other son, Isaac, that you don't know about, they'll get the land of Canaan, which today we call Israel. And then all those descendants who come from Ishmael, you get the rest of it. And that's how it's been ever since. And they're not going anywhere. The Arabs, the descendant of Ishmael, they're not going anywhere. God gave them all that land, Saudi Arabia, and then Israel. Um, but what he does ask him to do is, I need you to circumcise as a sign of the covenant. And you need to circumcise Ishmael. You need to circumcise everybody who's with you. And it's a sign that you're cutting a covenant with me, and I will vow to be your people. No, I'm not vowing to be your people. You're going to be my people. I'm vowing to be your God. And this land that I have promised is theirs. That's the two parts of the covenant. You're my people forever. You're my peeps. And this land is yours. Now, Abram said, oh, we've already got Ishmael. So you're saying that Sarah's going to get pregnant and that this Isaac is coming. Can't we just stick with Ishmael? Because Ishmael's 13 years old by now. And why didn't you say anything all this time? And God doesn't. It's so interesting. He'll let your Ishmael just grow up, and then you have to deal with it um, when you've done it your way. Because God never told him it would be through Hagar. We get impatient because we have a time limit on how long it should take God to do something, how long it should take in your life, how long it should take in somebody else's life. Well, it should be by now, but God has his own time limit. So then we start to force things to happen, and then we end up with an Ishmael. So Abraham's like, oh, that Ishmael might grow up before you. Like he's 13 years old, and now you're telling me that it's going to come through Sarah, and God's like, no, not Ishmael, Sarah. So he corrects him right away. And now go and circumcise. So he did, even though he's 99 years old, he was circumcised at 99. And everybody, all the adult males, everybody was circumcised. So in Genesis chapter 18, the very next chapter, it's not that much later. We think this is way later, but it's not. Because he's saying a year from now, I'll be back, and Sarah's going to have a child. Sarai, you'll change your name to Sarah. She's going to have a child. So it's not that much later. So we have to just read everything in context. Abraham is still um, recuperating from the circumcision, because that's a tall order to ask for someone who's 99 years old. So that's where we find him in Genesis chapter 18, verse 1. All that just happened, and now it's like the next day. Well, it's not the next day, but it's a short time later. So in Genesis chapter 18, verse 1, it says, then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. This was the time of day that people in the Middle East go inside. It's the middle of the day, and they get out of the heat. That's when it's hottest, and they're smart, and they say, "This, I'm going to stop working, and I'm going to go inside in the shade." We have a culture that says, don't stop working, keep working, keep working. But they're like, no, I'm not going to die from the heat. So they take their rest. It's the same time of day that we start to get sleepy. And if you've been working and you think, oh, I wish I had a nap right now. But our culture won't let us. But they've already got it built in. So Abraham was taking his midday. It was the heat of the day. So naturally, he was in his tent, recuperating still, right? Now it says, the Lord appeared unto him. This is Moses letting the reader know, the listener know, that this was actually the Lord. Abraham does not know this is the Lord. He doesn't know. He just thinks some strangers have appeared to him. So it says, Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre. If you remember the terebinth trees of Mamre, when God appeared to Abraham in chapter 13, and right after he had divided up his land with Lot, and he said, Lot, because they'd come from Egypt and now they had way too much stuff. And so they were competition for the grass, because you got your sheep, your cows, your bulls, your goats, and there's not enough land for all of our stuff that we got from Egypt. So let's divide up. And Lot chose Sodom and Gomorrah because it was greener down there. And again, that's our cautionary tale. Everything that looks greener is not necessarily better for us. So he said, oh, look at Sodom and look at Gomorrah. That's really green. Let me go down there. And Abram said, okay, I'll stay up here in the hills where there's less grass. And then God rewarded him and came to him and said, hey, I want you to look around. All this is yours. All this is going to belong to you. Have look east, north, west, south. All this belongs to you. And now I want you to walk the land. It says, in fact, in Genesis chapter 13, verse 17, arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. So Abraham didn't have any friends other than Lot. And now Lot is gone. His nephew is now gone. And so Abraham's by himself, and God's saying, walk around, make friends. This is your land. You've been acting like you're a stranger in this land, and you're not any longer. This is yours. I'm giving this land to you. So it says he walks around, and Abraham moved his tent for the first time and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre. Mamre is a friend of his, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. So he finally finds this set of trees and goes, oh, I think I'll stay here. And he makes friends with the people there. This is his first set of friends in Canaan. In Genesis chapter 14, after Lot gets kidnapped, remember the armies came in and they invaded Sodom and Gomorrah and they kidnapped everybody. They run up to him. And in Genesis chapter 14, verse 13, it says, then one who had escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre. That's where he is hanging out now. This is his place to hang out. The Mamre, the Amorite, he's the brother of Eshcol and the brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abraham. They were friends of his. So when he went to war to bring Lot back, Mamre and Eshcol and Aner, they all went with him, those brothers, because Abraham had finally made some friends. Okay, so now that he had gotten circumcised, he went back over to Mamre's house, basically. And he's relaxing by the terebinth trees again. Whew, okay, it's hot, and I don't feel like doing much. So, Genesis chapter 18, verse 2. So he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And he didn't know where they came from. Like, oh, man. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them. So standing by him doesn't literally mean right next to him, but he's standing near him, like, oh, man, there's 3 men. And he bowed himself to the ground. Now, he does this because these 3 men look very stately. They look very, but he does not think that they're angels. He thinks that they're men. But this is how Abraham decides to treat these men who look like they're somebody. He bows himself to the ground and he says, my Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Like, don't keep going. Stay here. Now, again, if he thought they were angels coming to give him a message, he would have just bowed down and said, yes, what do you have to tell me? But he's thinking they're traveling on their way somewhere. And he says, don't pass on by. Don't keep going. Listen, please let a little water be brought, and we'll wash your feet, and we'll rest yourselves under the tree, and I'll bring you a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. You may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. So let me give you some hospitality, and let me feed you, and wash your feet. And, this was a custom, right? Entertain you. Okay, so that's my wife did that. Now, the reason Moses is doing this is he's contrasting how Abram is receiving these strangers to the sin of Sodom. Now, this will probably be a surprise to people, but the sin of Sodom was not homosexuality. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't homosexuality going on in Sodom. I'm saying that's not why they were judged. Ezekiel tells us what the sin of Sodom was. And so we're stuck with what Ezekiel says. He's a prophet, and he says, here's what they did. Now, I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying there was no homosexuality going on in Sodom. There was everything was going on in Sodom, everything. But that's not the sin they were being judged for. In Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49, it says, look, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. So he's telling you, this is what they did wrong. This was their sin. She and her daughter, Gomorrah, she and her sister city, like the Twin Cities up in Minnesota, something like that. She and her sister city, Gomorrah, they had pride, fullness of food, and abundance of idleness. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. And they were haughty and committed abominations before me. Therefore, I took them away as I saw fit. So that's not what I've heard my whole life. So again, let's examine this. Ezekiel chapter 16. Look, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter had pride, fullness of food, and abundance of idleness. Now, next week, when we go to chapter 19 and Sodom is actually destroyed and everything, we will get into the specifics of that. But pride, that could have been translated arrogance. In fact, the Living Bible says your sister Sodom's sins were arrogance, laziness, and too much food. And thinking, well, that's what I do every Thanksgiving. Stay home. Do not go and visit 49 people. Small family. But he says, if too much food is how Sodom, I don't understand. Okay. So there's an arrogance. So let's examine the sin of Sodom because it was enough to get them destroyed. Arrogance, which is and laziness, meaning, and too much food. And he says, and they were haughty, and they did not strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. They were neglecting the poor and the needy. So their arrogance, like I've got mine, and you don't need yours, and they were heaping food to themselves and neglecting the poor and the needy in their midst. And they were too lazy. The laziness is to help other people. They'd gotten to the point where they didn't care that people were suffering. They didn't care that the needy people were starving in the streets. They didn't care that they were ill, that they were sick, that they had gotten to the point where they were heaping riches on themselves and could care less about other people. And this was a sin that God allows for a little while, and then like, nope, that's too much. If we look at 1 John chapter 3, 1 John chapter 3, and then we'll go back and examine what I'm talking about. 1 John chapter 3, verse 14 through 17. 1 John chapter 3, verses 14 through 17. It says, we know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren. So that John is the one, like, they'll know we're Christians by our love, how we treat other people. That's the only sign that you can know someone's a Christian, because of how we're no longer ruled by death. We're now ruled by the life that comes from Christ because we love the brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death. And then he goes on to define it. So if you hate those people because they didn't vote the same way you did, if you hate those people because they don't worship the same way you did, if you hate people, if you hate sinners, because this is what Jesus, remember they were trying to kill the woman who was caught in adultery. The man who was caught in adultery, they gave him $20, but her, they were going to kill her. And Jesus is like, no, I don't condemn you. Jesus can't. So we hate sinners today. We hate them, and you sinners. And Jesus just like never did that. So he's saying, if you're hating your brother, if you're hating people, you're abiding in death, and God's life is not in you. So whoever, verse 15 of 1 John chapter 3, whoever hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. So you know all these scriptures, John. If he laid down his life for us, that's how we have to do other people. We need to lay down our life for them and give to them and care about them. And we also ought to lay down our lives for our brother. Why don't I just read the scripture instead of, okay, verse 17. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? So if you've got some and you see people who are needy and you see people who are suffering and you shut up your heart, your passion, right? And you don't give to someone who's suffering, whatever it is they need, medical attention, food, shelter, whatever. How does the love of God abiding in you if you can just drive by the poor and drive and well, they're on their own and they shouldn't have come here to our country in the first place. So that however they suffer, that's just too bad because they're trying to come over and get what we have. Yeah, they are. And if you shut up your compassion and say, no, we worked hard for this and you can't have any. Ezekiel said that was a sin of Sodom. John says you're a murderer. God's love doesn't abide in us if we act that way toward the poor. Remember how mad we got during the first part of the pandemic when people were just buying up everything and other people were suffering, like there's no meat in the store, there's no toilet tissue, and people were just hoarding it. And we thought, that's horrible. How can you do that? And people have meat and you're just hoarding it all. And we thought that's anyway, so how can you do that knowing that people are suffering and you have so much? And Ezekiel says that's the sin of Sodom. They were arrogant and lazy and not wanting to help their brother, and they had too much food and would not share, and so they didn't strengthen the hand of need. He says that was that's the sin that was coming from their heart. Now it manifested itself in many ways, and so we'll get to how it manifests itself sexually and all these other places when we specifically get to Sodom. But just know that that Moses is contrasting on purpose what Abraham did. When Abraham saw these people who he did not know, he immediately bowed down. He says, I want to feed you. Here, let me wash your feet. And I don't even know you, but I want to give to you. And I don't even know who you are, right? But how can I give you of my abundance? And the reason he's emphasizing this is because in the very next episode, this is what Sodom was judged for. And everybody knows this. When Ezekiel says, hey, let me remind you, the sin of Sodom was all the Jews throughout their oral history had passed down. They knew what was going on in Sodom. We see one incident of when the angels showed up and the men came out and said, but that wasn't their sin. That was not their sin. So we're stuck with what Ezekiel says their sin is. And so let me explain how arrogance can just be so evil. And this is I wish this was not a true story, but there was a city and there's a woman who was going to jump off a bridge, an important bridge in the city. And the police were there and they're trying to talk her down. And it was holding up traffic. She was doing it at the rush hour, and people from both sides could not pass. I mean, because this important bridge for you to get from one side of the issue to the other, and people were honking their horns and saying, "Jump already! Just jump and get it over with. Kill yourself. I've got to get home." And it's that kind of evilness where you have no compassion. It's like, no, my life is more. I got to get home to my dinner. My favorite show's coming on, and that's when you got too much food, you got abundance, and this person's suffering so much that they're willing to jump off a bridge. But people were angry that it was delaying them from getting home. And so it's that kind of arrogance. That's what he means by arrogance and prideful. And you've got too much that you've now become this evil person that could care less about what other people are going through and how they're suffering.
Trying to get to my Bible study.
I need to get to my Bible study. Oh, please, we have so many stories about that. So, I got to go to my church, and you're delaying me. Just jump off so that the traffic can keep going. And that's evil. That's evil. And so, and we're that way. when we're late for church. Honk, honk. Oh, I wish that homeless person would hurry up and cross the street so I can go. I'm late for church, where I can learn about giving to the poor. So um, so I'm just saying. So again, we'll get way into and all that, what was going on. But I'm just bringing up that he's contrasting it. That's why he's saying what Abraham did this, Abraham did that, because Abraham again does not know these are angels. He thinks that they're just strangers on their way. But God was teaching him to give, right? Every time Abram gave, God blessed him with more. And he said, okay, Lot, you take all the good land down there by Sodom. I'll just stay up here. And God blessed him with more. And God kept, he went to rescue Lot, to put his life in danger. And God blessed him with more, and he said, no, I don't want here. And he's giving it away. I don't want to say that the king of Egypt blessed. And God keeps blessing him, right? Because he's teaching him certain spiritual principles. Now, so I'll get back to the lesson. But I don't want to, wait, I put this in here on purpose. I just remember. I don't want to go the other way and then say, now, because here's what the flesh does. The flesh likes to go to extreme one way or the other. So it's not that we're now to roam the streets night and day, 24 hours a day, trying to find people so we can give them stuff. Because the flesh can make that a sin, because there are people who give just so everybody can know that they give. Oh yeah, my house is always open and I just get, and they're bragging about how much they give all the time and what great givers they are, and that's fleshly. That's just as much of a sin. That's why when Jesus talked about the two men who went to the temple and the one bragged about, I pray 3 times a week and I fast and he says that was sin, and he wasn't acquitted of any of those sins. So you can be sinful. You can give out of fear. You can give out of oh, God's going to strike me down if I don't give. I better get, and none of that. He's just saying we need to open up. He says you've shut up your bowels of compassion. You shut them up. And so God's trying to move through you to give, but you shut them up. Like, I'm not going to go to the bathroom, right? You shut up your mouth. Like, no, I'm not going to let it out. He says, but so you got to be open so that when the Spirit comes on you, you give when he tells you to, as opposed to you're angry. Like, why? Well, they got themselves in that situation. He's just saying be open to the Spirit. So again, you don't want to hoard all your goods and build your storehouses bigger and bigger and bigger. And then God comes to you and says, okay, you've got all these storehouses, but normally you're going to die tonight. So what good did that do you? And yet you don't want to go the other way and just give everything constantly because you're afraid or because you want everybody to pat you on the back for it. It's being open to the Spirit to give when he tells you to. Acts chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, it says, now Peter and John went up together to the temple at the hour of prayer. It was the 9th hour. So they went to the temple. We're not going to a synagogue, so they're going to the temple that Jesus went to many times. And a certain man who was lame from his mother's womb was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful, to ask alms from those who went to the temple. So this man had been laid there daily, which means Jesus had seen this man and probably given an alms. But at this particular time, you all know this story that the Spirit of God came on Peter and John, and they said, and he just stuck out to them, and he says, look at us. And God moved to heal this man. Now, God never moved on Jesus to do that because there was a time and place that God wanted that to happen. He wanted that to happen under Peter and John's ministry. So even though Jesus went by, and when the man asked for alms, I'm sure he, gave him what he had, God never moved on him to heal that man because there's a time and place that God's going to do everything. So people could have yelled at Jesus, why didn't you heal that man? Because God didn't move on me to do that. And so we just supposed to be open. We have to leave our bowels of compassion open so that God will move on us so that we can feel it. Because God's not going to just, oh, I'm on fire, I better go give something to somebody. He's going to move on your heart. But if you shut them up with anger, with arrogance, with too much food, and you're satisfied and you're too lazy, then you won't feel God when he moves on you. We won't feel him when he moves on us to give because we already have an opinion about why somebody is in that situation. We've already judged them. That's another reason why the Bible says don't judge people. because you're judging why they are, and we don't know their situation, we don't know their heart, we don't know anything about them, but we already have an opinion about how they got themselves in trouble, and they must have done this, and when you're judging people and already condemning them, well, then they deserve that, because that condemnation always goes with judgment. You're a judge passing sentence. They deserve where they are. Then you can't feel God when He moves on you. That's why we don't judge people. That's why He said, don't have an opinion about people. You don't know what's going on with them. God looks at the heart. You don't know what's going on with them, so don't have an opinion about him, because that blocks you from when the Spirit of God comes on you to do something to them, to say something to them, to give to them, or whatever, So just leave open just try to have a blank mind. And in Matthew, when the disciples asked Jesus how to pray, he spends the next 4 chapters, he's still talking about prayer when he says, don't worry, don't judge, forgive. These are all hindrances to hearing from God when you pray. He's not just rambling about other subjects. He's saying when you stand praying, forgive, because if you got unforgiveness, then you won't be able to hear God when he's saying you go up to that person because you're still mad at them. He's saying if you're worried about he says, take no thought about how I'm going to, because if you're worried, oh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? You can't hear when God's giving you the plan of what to do, because you're already devising your own plan, and he says, don't be angry with others. Don't judge others. These are all the hindrances that when you say, Lord, thy will be done, the next part of that is God tells you what his will is. That's why you're saying thy will be done. Jesus says, say thy will be done. So you're saying, Lord, tell me what you want me to do. But when you stand praying, if we're angry, if we're this all the stuff in Matthew, I don't mean to teach Matthew all over again, that inhibits us from hearing the will. And so that's why Jesus spends the next 4 chapters. He's not just talking, like they're not thinking, oh Lord, here goes Jesus again. It's still talking about the subject of prayer. So Abraham was open when these people came, and the Spirit of God moved on him, and he gave, and Moses is pointing that out because he's contrasting with what's about to happen to Sodom. So, okay. So they say to him in Genesis chapter 18, verse 5, they said, okay, do as you have said. If you want to do all that, go ahead and do it. Hebrews 13, verse 2. In Hebrews 13, verse 2, it says, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing, some have unwittingly entertained angels, or you've heard entertain angels unaware. So when you see people, go ahead and be nice. Unless something's in you telling you not to, your first thought should be to be pleasant, to be sweet, to be loving, to be open to, as opposed to be guarded, unless something in you says, watch out for that person, right? So err on the side of entertaining strangers first, because you don't know. God might be sending a messenger. And let's be clear, the word angelos, angel, just means messenger. It's a messenger of God. We're always picturing someone in a white robe with a halo and big wings. And again, only the cherubim had wings. Nobody had a halo, but they would have a light maybe shining on their face that we depicted as a halo. But the angels were simply the messengers of God. They were just messengers. So he says, God may be sending somebody to you to give you that answer you've been looking for. You could be in the grocery store line, and everybody's had this experience where you just struck up a conversation with somebody, and they might have said something and given you a piece of the advice, and say, oh, I'm so glad I ran into you, because I've been wondering about that. Isn't that so interesting? I was just praying about that. And that person has a piece of information. We may not even know them, but they're a messenger of God. But because we've already been rude to that person, I don't know you, then the means that God was using to get that message to us, we don't make ourselves available to it. And guess what? God doesn't say, oh man, well, okay, I'll try some other way. God's like, well, that's too bad. I'm not going to, that was the thing. So you missed it. Well, how come God never answered me? I did. God doesn't stretch himself for like, oh man, okay, well, let me try it this way. It's like, here's the way I'm going to say this to you. Here's how I'm going to speak to you. There are words I put in your pastor's mouth. There's words I put in your spouse's mouth. There's words I put in your kid's mouth. There's words I put in your neighbor's mouth. And there's things I put in your some stranger's mouth. And if you are doing what I say to do, if you're loving everybody, if you're going to church, if you're fellowshipping, if you're listening to your wife or your husband, if you're kind to your neighbor, you will get all this information. But I'm not going to keep trying different things. God doesn't go, oh man, that didn't work. Let me try something else. It's like, well, I sent the answer. You did not get it. So he says, be careful. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing, some have unwittingly entertained messengers of God. And that's all that these people were, messengers of God. So Genesis chapter 18, oh my goodness. So verse 6. So Abram hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a tender and good calf and gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. Some people think that was Ishmael, who knows? But he gave it to some young man. I don't know who you are, but here. And he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk. And this is not even important, so I won't even, but it was like sour milk and sweet milk. They translated it butter. But anyway, and the calf, which he had prepared, and he set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. Now, this is, so people have said, well, they didn't really eat. They pretended to eat because they were angels, and angels can't eat. And so they get this from this one time in the book of Judges. So again, if he thinks they're angels, he's not feeding them, and because they're angels, they can get food anytime they want. He really thinks they're strangers on their way somewhere. He's just being gracious because, oh look, God has sent this person across my path. Let me be gracious to this person. Okay, and they ate. Now in Judges chapter 13, it's about Samson's mother and father, and an angel, a messenger, appeared to Samson's mother. Now Samson hasn't been born yet, but she's been praying and she wants to give a child. She's going to dedicate it to the Lord. And the angel appears to her and says, okay, you're going to have a child, and he explains several things to her. And then he leaves, and she goes and tells her husband, and the husband's like, what? And well, next time you see him, let me know so I can talk to him. So in verse 11, it says, so Manoah, that's the husband, arose and he followed his wife. And when he came to the man, he said to him, are you the man who spoke to this woman? Now, again, they don't know it's an angel. They just think it's some man who maybe you know something, Are you the man who spoke to this? And he says, I am. And Manoah said, well, now let your words come to pass. I mean, this is great if that really happened. What will be the boy's rule of life and his work? And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful. I already told it to her. I didn't tell it to you. Now, sometimes God comes to both and says, here's what I'm telling both of you. And sometimes God comes to one person because it's their responsibility. They have duties that they need to follow, and you can't do it for them. So there's something God is telling them to do, not telling you about it. He's telling that person, and they have to do what God's telling them to do. And so it's their lesson to learn, and it's their thing to fail. And plus, you might give them, you might read from the book of First and Second Opinions about what they should do and what they should say, and what you should do it like this, and it's their lesson. They've got to do it how they feel God is leading them. So the angel said, of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful. I gave her instructions. So verse 14, she may not eat anything that comes from the vine, nor may she drink wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean. All that I commanded her, let her observe. So I told her, explained it to her, and she's got to believe that what I'm saying is true. Because first of all, she doesn't feel pregnant, but in advance, change your diet and don't do this, don't do that. Because in faith, you're saying, I believe God is doing this. And so I'm going to act accordingly. I'm going to prepare myself according to what he's saying, even though I don't see it yet. But since the angel knows it's going to happen, and it might be a while before she realizes she's pregnant, let me tell her in advance what she needs to take care of so that this baby is okay. So verse 15, then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, well, please let us detain you, and we will prepare a young goat for you. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, though you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord. For Manoah did not know he was an angel of the Lord. Manoah didn't know. He's just thinking, oh, let me do this. I'm not going to eat. And so people have created an entire doctrine. Angels don't eat. But this guy was saying this because of Manoah, because Manoah was putting too much on it. And he's too into it. And if I stay here and eat with this person, he's going to start and pump me for information. And he's going to. So if you do make an offering, offer to the Lord, because I'm not going to eat with you. These angels that came to Abraham, they sat down and ate. Now, people say, well, they pretended to eat. But Abraham would have noticed that the food wasn't disappearing. He made all that food for them. Where were they? Were they stuffing it in their shirt or put? No. He sat and watched them eat. So so we just make up stuff. Okay. In fact, remember when Jesus appeared to the disciples after he rose from the dead, and the women, they were the first ones there because they were about their business. The men were back sulking, right? And then it's the women that went and told the men, I think he rose. So they ran, and they see an empty tomb, so they're like, man, oh, we missed him. So this man just comes up to the disciples as they're walking back and starts talking to them. Don't you know Jesus to come up to you and just start talking to you? Because he wants to see where you're at, what you're thinking, because we have a church behavior. So Jesus doesn't come up to you while you're in church and start talking to you. He waits till you at the drugstore or somewhere, and starts talking to you to see who are you really. So he's talking to them. And verse 15 of Luke chapter 24 says, so it was while they conversed and reasoned that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were restrained, so they did not know him. Skipping down to verse 30, after he's talking and explaining stuff, and they're complaining, like, I don't get it, and how come this happened? And he's explaining to them, did he say he was going to die and rise from the dead? And, oh yeah, I think he did. Didn't he say this to you? Didn't he say that? Oh yeah, I get, okay. So verse 30, now it came to pass as he sat at table with them, because he was about to leave, and they said, no, come on in, have some food, right? And if they had not done that, they would have missed the revelation that was coming up. That's why he says you got to be nice to people. It doesn't mean you have to invite every single person that you meet into your house, but be kind to people, because you never know, because you may have entered, if the Spirit of God moves on you to do that. So, but it says that as he's at the table with them, that he took bread, he blessed it and broke it, and he gave it to them. Then their eyes were open and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight, because he blessed the bread and he broke it. And they went, that's Jesus. That's because he will bless you and then break you. He will bless you and then break you so that you can be used more. It's like, that they do, that story they do about the kid that was in line and his sister got a glow stick and she's playing with it, and then the brother takes it and breaks it and she cries, ah! But it's like, no, it's not going to do everything it's supposed to do. You got to break it to get everything going. And so when he blessed it and he broke it, and that, so they went, that's Jesus. Verse 40. But while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, because they're like, because he showed back up, because he disappeared. Ha, that was me. You didn't even know it. Then he comes back and scares them, because he just walks in. Okay, Jesus, don't be walking in on me. So, but while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, he said to them, have you any food here? So they gave him a piece of broiled fish and some honeycomb, and he took it and ate in their presence to show you, I'm here. I'm really here. Let me eat this food so you realize I'm a real person. I'm not, but you're a spirit. No, God prepared a body for me, and God had prepared a body for those angels. And so they were able to eat. They were just normal. And here's like 10 minutes on eating. Okay, so let's come back. Oh, by the way, I'll get to that next week. So, because we have all these things about angels. So then they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? Now, because this is the real reason they were there. This is the real reason they were there. To give a message to Sarah, because Abraham hadn't told her what the angel said about Ishmael. So that's why they were there. And yet, had Abraham not invited them in, this part wouldn't have come out, right? So you can say, get on now. I don't have time for this, and that's fine. But sometimes we miss things because we're just mean to people unnecessarily. So because he invited him in, they said, hey, by the way, where's your wife, Sarah? And now we have their ministry. So I want to explain when you are kind to people, sometimes you get the benefit of their ministry. God will then flow through that person. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 40 to 42, Matthew chapter 10, verse 40 to 42, it says, him who receives you receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. And he means people who listen to your word, I'll be able to flow through you to them. Those who receive you, when you go out and preach, they'll be receiving me, because now you'll be able to minister to them. People who don't, remember he said, just dust yourself, whatever that means. Wipe the dust off your feet and get out. But if they receive you and say, oh, I want to hear you, then they'll receive me, and they'll get that ministry flowing through them. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And you read that and you think, oh, if I receive a prophet, I get $100. But if I receive a righteous man, I get $25. And because what's a prophet's reward and what's a righteous man's reward? And he means the reward of their ministry. If there's a prophet in your midst and you acknowledge that and you respect them like a prophet, then you'll receive the reward of that ministry. Same thing with just a righteous man. If somebody receives a righteous man and says, yes, you've got, and that's happened to you, right? You've had people say, hey, can you pray for me? Can you? And they know that you're righteous. And they may not be in the church, or they may be in the church a long time ago, but they see that you're righteous, that you're living a certain way, and they hear how you talk about Jesus, and so they receive the reward of that, because they call you up and say, I know that you're righteous, so will you pray for me? My daughter's in the hospital. You say, yes, I'll pray for you. And they receive the reward of that, right? Because now a righteous person, and the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. That's one reason why James wrote that. So he receives a prophet, will see the reward of his ministry. He receives a righteous man, receive the reward of his ministry. He says, and whoever gives one of these little ones a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple, I say he should by no, even just a child, if you're just kind to them, because in parts of certain cultures, people are mean to kids and get out of here. But even if you're just kind to a child, God can speak through that child to you. So you have to understand that God can speak through anybody. For example, receiving that prophet's reward. Remember the woman from Shunem, the Shunammite woman, in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 8 through 10. It says, now it happened one day that Elisha went to Shunem, where there was a notable woman, and she persuaded him to eat some food. Come in and eat some food. So it was, as often as he passed by, he would turn in there to eat some food. And she said to her husband, look, I know that this is a holy man of God. Like, I can tell this is a man of God. Now, he didn't walk around with the prophet sign on, but I can perceive this is a holy man of God who passes by us regularly. Please let us make a small upper room on the wall, and let us put a bed for him there. Not literally on the wall, but in the way they're. But let's make an upper room for him upstairs. Put a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lampstand, so it will be whenever he comes to us, he can turn in there. So, because I know that there's something about this person. She's just being kind. She's not doing it in order to get something from him. She's doing it out of respect of his office. And if the same thing would happen if we treated our pastors right, if we treated all these people correctly, you'd get the benefit of their ministry. And you know the story that her son later got sick, and that she was able to, he came and he prayed for the son, and same thing with another woman who she had oil, and she was able to feed her kids because of how she treated the prophet. And so she got the reward of his ministry because she respected him. And that's what Jesus is saying, because it said that a prophet is not without honor in his own country, because remember, Jesus couldn't do any mighty work in his own country because they didn't respect him. So he could not do any, it's not like he wouldn't, like, no, but the Spirit didn't flow from him to those people because they didn't respect him. They didn't think he had anything. But the woman with issue of blood who ran up, and if I just touch the hem of his garment, I'm going to get something. She got something. So it says you need to respect all people, because we don't know who God might use. You don't. I've heard, my wife and I were someplace once, and this crazy woman, was walking through this restaurant and just talking crazy. She was prophesying. She would walk by people and saying, you sleeping with your secretary. And I mean, she went around just crazy. But we said,
That's God.
that's God speaking to that. Let's pray she don't come over here. Let's leave before she sees us. And so, but if you think to yourself, that homeless person data, you don't know. Because trust me, God will dress up like a homeless person. God will dress up like anything. And just send someone in your midst. And if we disrespect that person because we only respect people who are in suits and ties, and didn't James talk about that? It says you give the people the highest, best seats at the table because they're dressed, and the poor you send over there. And that's why you're supposed to be no respecter of persons. Don't say, well, that wealthy person, I'll give them a lot of respect, but that poor person, what do they know? Because you don't know who God is using and who God is speaking through. We don't know who God is going to send give us a message. So you have to love everybody. For God so loved the world. And if you hate your brother, if you hate that person because they didn't vote like you wanted them to vote, that person may have something for you, and we're missing it. We're going to miss it. So Abraham, because he was good to these people, the second part came, which was about Sarah. So they said, I said to him, where's Sarah, your wife? And he said, here in the tent. So back to the lesson. And so he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. No, so here's what the person says. Because Sarah was not literally in the tent right next to him, but right outside the tent, right? So he says, she's here listening. So the angel says, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. Like, I'll be back in 9 months, right? And behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. So Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now, Abram already knew this because God had told them this earlier. So why did the angel have to show up and tell them? Because Abraham had not told his wife. And that never happens. Husbands always tell their wives everything. But Abraham had not told his wife. And so now I have a theory. Now, this is just a theory. This is not in the Bible at all. But I'm thinking, after all that stuff they went through with Hagar, and Sarah got all upset and kicked her out, and then Hagar came back, and now they're raising somebody else's son. And then the angel shows up. Oh, by the way, all that stuff you went through with Hagar, you made that up. Sarah's going to have a child. It's like, oh, Lord, if I tell this woman, she's going to go crazy. We've been raising this other son for 13 years, and now I'm supposed to go and say, oh, by the way, that child that we have with Hagar, no, that's wrong. You're going to get pregnant. What? So he says, well, let me wait until she get pregnant and it starts to show. And then, because I don't want to say nothing if it's not going to happen and have her go crazy, go off on me. So he did not. So that's my theory. But let's just say, suffice it to say, he'd had this incredible experience with God. He'd circumcised all these people, but he hadn't told Sarah what God had said. So it says Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Verse 11. Now he's just reminding us. Verse 11. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore, Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure? My Lord being old also? Like, I'm going to have what? So I'm thinking, so clearly this is the first time she's heard this. That's why she laughed, because she hadn't heard, like, what? This is news. And the angel's thinking, God's thinking, let me go down and send an angel so she knows she's giving, so that she can prepare herself. She needs to know she's pregnant. Abraham is sitting on this, and this woman needs to know that she's pregnant so she can eat right and take care of herself, all that stuff, right? So, but she's laughing because this is her first time hearing this. So verse 13, and the Lord said to Abraham, again, through the messenger, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. So now Sarah's upset because, why'd you laugh? But Sarah denied it, saying, I laugh. Now, technically, she was right. She didn't laugh out loud because the Bible says she laughed within herself. But the problem is, and he said, no, but you did laugh because God looks at the heart. And it doesn't matter what we outwardly do. He knows what's going on inside. 1 Samuel verse 16, I'm sorry, chapter 16, verse 7, when Samuel had showed up to David's dad, right? And David's dad had like 7 sons, and David's the youngest. And he said, bring them all out because one of them was supposed to be king. He brought them all out except for David, because David's just the youngest. And plus he had red hair, and I don't know what in that culture that meant something. I don't know what it meant. But yeah, I don't know where that red hair came from. But anyway, so he brought out the oldest son, figuring it was got to be this one. Because look, he's tall and he's good looking. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I refused him. He's not, don't get fooled, because we can get caught up, right, in how somebody looks. Oh, God's going to use you. Look how good looking you are. Oh, that little runt, God's not going to use you. And that's the very one that God uses, right? He says, for the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so that's the problem, is God knows, God's judging us by what's going on inside and not what's on the outside. And so,
what else you got back there?
see, so he made him bring out more kids, because just keep bringing them out, and then God will tell me who he's using, but not based on what the outward says. But he knows who we're going to be based on our heart. And so that's why the angel says, no, you laughed on the inside because you did not believe this. Now he's not yelling at her. He's just saying there's nothing too hard for God. So you need to believe it, because you need to change your behavior. I'm going to do this. And there's certain things that we are believing God for, and we need to change our behavior in advance, because it's going to happen. So if God's about to do that thing, then you need to go ahead and clean this up or straighten that up or get ready for this, because he's going to give you what you asked for, because what he's placed in your heart. He gave you that desire, and he's going. So go ahead and start acting like it's about to happen. Start setting this up and setting that up. And that's what he's telling Sarah. Is anything too hard for God? Even though I know you're past it, but that past the childbearing age doesn't mean anything to God. God made your body, so he can do whatever he wants with it. So the angel of the Lord began to go ahead and describe this to her. She needed to know. And that's why he was there. And then he was there for part 2. And we will get to part 2, because now he's about to go down to Sodom. And again, Moses is contrasting how Abraham treated these strangers, and that's why he got the benefit of this. Again, had he let that, I don't know these people, let me pass by, Sarah wouldn't have known until she was, 6 months pregnant. What's going on here? And might have thought, I'm just getting fat. Who knows what she would have thought, but she certainly would have thought she was pregnant. So she needed to know that in advance. And had Abraham not let them in, showed us hospitality, then he wouldn't have gotten this word from God. And that's why the scripture says we need to be careful. God is sending messengers to us, and we don't know it's a messenger from God. So that's why you just have to love everybody. Love everybody. Doesn't say you have to invite everybody into your house, but you have to love everybody. And if you have that attitude toward everyone, the lowest and the biggest and the tallest and the shortest, then when God moves on you to do something, we are open to it.
Put some respect on their name.
Put some respect on everybody's name, right? And so that's everybody. Some person on the street, God may move you to go and give them some money, if God moves on you to do that, and they may say, God bless you, and something may come out of their mouth for you. Don't ignore it, because that could be, again, God will dress up like anybody just to see. And you saw how Jesus just walked with disciples, didn't say, I'm Jesus, hello, you've been looking for me. He just walked with them, and if he does, so we see how he acts. God is putting these things in the Bible so we can look at our lives and say, oh, well, if he did that then, I'm sure he's probably doing that now. So when has Jesus been walking with us and we just didn't know? When does he send a messenger, but we shut them out? Well, you sit in the back row because I've reserved this for the important people. Okay. But you're going to miss out on your blessing. So Abraham didn't miss out on his, and we gotta be careful not to miss out on ours. And we'll continue with part 2 of Genesis chapter 18 next week. Thank you so much for spending all this time listening to me. And again, if you remember Good Shepherd, stay tuned for our Pastor Grimm, and I'll see most of you on Wednesday night. And God bless you. Talk to you later in live video.